I'm Karin Plötz, and I'm very happy to speak today with Brij Kotharie about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education in India. Brij Kotharie is the founder of Planet Read and Bookbox, and beside, he is an entrepreneur and an academic. Hello, Brij. It's a pleasure for me to talk to you. And I have the first question. As an academic, did you ever thought of a pandemic that would influence and changes the life or the daily life of millions of people all over the world?
No, honestly, I don't think I ever anticipated something like this. In fact, it makes me think of the time when probably dinosaurs disappeared 65 million years ago. Okay, and something happened, and overnight their climate changed, and a creature that was there for 165 million years before that ended up disappearing. So I think it made me think that far back. So I obviously never anticipated something like this.
So I hope it would not so bad as you imagine. So hope it would go better. Okay. The COVID pandemic has changed the world's life, no? But India, as the second largest population, has also the second highest infection rate. Otherwise, it has the death rate is below many other states like the United States, Great Britain, or France. What is the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic now in India, and what are the biggest challenges which faces India?
Yeah, I mean, in India, the situation is obviously pretty concerning. For example, the confirmed cases in the US is about 7 million, and India is not far behind, 6 million cases. It's concerning because the cases per day are also rising quite fast. About 90,000 cases per day is what we're averaging right now. And then perhaps the silver lining in this is that the deaths are probably lower. So per million, for example, in India, it's about 67 to 70 per million population, as compared to very advanced countries, US, UK, Belgium, Italy, Spain. All of these countries actually their deaths are in the range of 600 to 850 deaths per million. So it's really, the death rate is 10 times more in many of these advanced countries. So in India, perhaps it's a bit of a theory still at this stage, but I think the fact that we have a younger population, 50% of the population being below 25, that has helped possibly. Now, this is still a theory. There are many other theories around it, but it's one of those unexplained facts in India.
And what are the biggest challenges which faces India? Because you also have had a lockdown, no?
Yes. So one of the issues with the lockdown was that it happened overnight, and it was a little too fast, perhaps. So as a result, actually, people didn't have time to prepare. And I think the people who really got hit is about 130 million migrants who got really stuck wherever they were all over the country. And I mean, imagine that overnight your livelihood is sort of gone. And you don't have food, you don't have shelter, so then you have to find a way to still survive. So I think those are the people who were really, really hit. And then, of course, later on, the challenge was how do they get to their safety nets, which is really back home in their own villages. And so once they had to go back to their villages, it was already, the virus had spread possibly through them as well to different parts of the country. So as a result, really now it has spread to many parts of the country.
Oh, yes. And the other problem, which is the problem due to the COVID-19 pandemic, is the closing of schools. There were 1.2 billion children affected by the closing of schools all over the world. And I think it had also consequences on India. India has improved its literacy rate in the latest years by nearly 80% now, I think. And how does the closing of schools and the lockdown affect to the success in literacy in India?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question still, actually. Yes, the schools have shut down. So really about 300 million students are, not having any school. Now that's just in India, and you stated the number globally. That is huge. Now, in India, I think one has to still qualify because there are really the upper tier third of the people in India are actually dealing with the school closures very similar to how it is in the West, perhaps, right? They have access to online, they have access to perhaps not the best situation, but still they're managing somehow. But that's 1/3 of the population, let's say, roughly. But there's a 2/3 of the population for whom the whole situation is really a shutdown because they don't have online tools, for example. Let me just give you an example of how much access people have to digital technologies, let's say. Internet is about 25% at best of the population that has, and that's mostly on smartphones, not on necessarily on computers. Now, on computers, it's about 10% of the population that has. So digital online education becomes a very difficult challenge in India for the 2/3 of the population. So the school shutdown has really affected that 2/3 of the population. Now, I just heard a interaction, for example, with Nobel Prize winner Abhijit Banerjee, and he had something very interesting to say, is that even before COVID, we actually had an education crisis.
Yes.
So half the population, for example, half the student population is not able to, for example, read something as simple as a class 2 level text. Now in class 5, you can't do that. So that's really, really a major challenge that was already there. So this pandemic hit that challenge. Now, what his theory, at least his argument was that if something that was already quite wasteful in the system and we were not succeeding, on top of it, if there's a pandemic that comes in, interestingly, he said, well, let's not worry about the pandemic as such as the major crisis. The crisis was already there.
Yes.
The
So
pandemic only added to it.
yeah, so the pandemic has focused on the really problems that are already there.
Are already there. So if we hadn't solved those problems, then and the pandemic, the fact is that it will at some point, not in the distant future, in the near future, will probably be behind us, and we'll be back to. So I think we still have to go back and deal with the same old system problems that were already there.
Yeah. So, and you already have found some solutions, and your work with Planet Read and the same language subtitling has had and has a great effect on the literacy rate in India. Can you give us a short overview about SLS and your efforts and what is happening now and maybe happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, let me just give you a little bit of the broad digital
Yes.
and what's
Yes.
going on even during the pandemic that people are trying.
Yeah.
Okay. So for example, and then I can talk a little bit about the Planet Read experience as well. So what's interesting, there are a few models that are working. And I like to think of it is that which model works in which digital ecosystem.
Okay.
So for example, Khan Academy was created in the US ecosystem, right? Where they had certain specific needs of filling the gaps and having videos that they could see and they had access. So it worked perfectly. Now there are versions of the Khan Academy in Indian languages that people are creating. So that's one model that is actually kind of working for people who have digital access.
So it would work for people with a laptop or a PC, and then they can work with it.
Yes, and even if they have mobile phone access, like smartphone access, but generally children don't have smartphone access actually in India. Many children, the certainly the rich do, but 2/3 of India children don't. And even there, the girls have less access than the boys
Oh,
because the data costs. And so once anything has a cost to it, the boys are favored, unfortunately. Right? So
in
there
this
is that problem as also.
in these times, it's always the same that they really girls are more neglected.
Yes. And unfortunately, well, girls already are getting about, on average, 3 years less of schooling in India, on average.
Okay.
And then when you have an online access, they have less access than the boys. So that problem is very much, there's a gender problem, there's a rural urban problem. And in any case, as we all know, even in the societies that we are familiar with, um, you can't really do online schooling easily on a smartphone. Most children use the smartphone for communicating across their friends or whatever. It's more like a communication tool versus a educational platform. In fact, most children are still on the computer or still on an iPad or something that's a
Mm.
tablet that they're using. Um, so going back to the model, so one is the Khan Academy model. Interestingly, the government started an interesting model, and I think it has potential. I think it's still not proven yet, but it has potential. For example, they started a uh, TV channel for every class from class 1 till class 12. So there are
Ah,
12 TV channels, let's say.
it's going in TV, so you have not necessarily to have an computer.
Yes. So TV reaches close to actually 1 billion people in India,
Wow.
right? So now what they're trying to do is have classroom teaching, literally the curriculum on television now, and
Hmm.
each class having its own channel. Now this is not a bad idea, given that the access is there. Of course, I don't think anybody had the time to create proper content so that it would be very professionally done as well.
Hmm.
But that's more an implementation issue. But I think the idea is interesting. So that's one model, and I hope they perfect that model rather than say, oh, it worked or it didn't work. But I think it has potential.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's of course the Sesame model, which is for the, at least for the early education, um, where they created content that excites children to get excited about reading and early education, right? But for that you have to still create professional content, and it's a relatively expensive approach, but then it reaches a lot of people. So that model, and it has worked in many countries, including India. So that's
Hmm.
another interesting model in the online digital space. um, the
But
model.
it's
Yeah.
also not only digital, online digital, or it's per TV also.
Yeah, so Sesame's model is very much on TV,
Okay.
and yeah, so that's an interesting model for which you create the content. The model that actually Planet Read works in is slightly different, which is basically what we do is subtitle existing popular films, right, in the same language as the
Hmm.
audio. So what you hear is what you read. So whether it's the dialogue or whether it's a song, and because India has 22 official languages, so you really need to solve the problem of reading and literacy from a linguistic standpoint as well. It's very diverse, and so what we're saying is that if 1 billion people are already watching nearly 4 hours of television every day, and most of it is entertainment content, so slide something like reading and literacy practice into the content that they already watch. So now this is a slightly different model for reading and development, which doesn't create content, which only uses existing technologies and existing passion for people's viewing habits, and combines them for lifelong reading practice. And for that, we have evidence.
Yeah. When did you start it with this?
Well, the idea was born in 1996, actually.
Oh.
And then since then, we have done a fair bit of research on it to see whether it works, and it actually quite works. And there are two major research findings here. One is that any audiovisual content that has subtitles in the same language, the viewer cannot ignore the subtitles as long as they know a little bit how to read. Little bit how to read, when I mean, is really their ability to decode some letters or some words, which is what most children in India anyway have from schools, right? But what they don't have is that practice throughout their lives, right? So that's one. And then this kind of practice over time, within 3 to 5 years of exposure on something that they already watch, that reading practice makes them a good reader, pretty much almost without thinking about it. And now it's national policy. So now actually the Ministry of Information Broadcasting actually took a very important step to require that all television programming that is entertainment based on in any language should have the same language subtitles. So 50% of that content has to have it by 2025. So we're still in that phase where it's not yet implemented, but we have about 5 years to actually get there.
And that is then the cooperation with you and the government?
Yes. So this is something that because the evidence was built and it was the evidence was pretty much from research projects at the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, where I teach also, and that evidence has helped push this in policy, and then now the idea is that we will implement this not only on existing content on television, but also on streaming platforms like Netflix, like Amazon Prime. For example, you will be surprised to know that actually Netflix and Amazon and others like these streaming platforms don't provide subtitles in the same language for most languages. They provide it for English, they perhaps provide it for French, perhaps German, or a few languages, which are mostly in the West, right? Mostly in the global North. But they don't provide it in Hindi or many Indian languages. And what we are also trying to tell these companies is that please provide same language subtitles, no matter what the language, so that parents and children have the option of turning it on and give their children reading practice.
Yes. How many languages did you fulfill now with Planet Read?
Oh, we have been subtitling in about 10 languages, major languages in India, but most of these have been pilot studies. And now with the policy, this will become systemically implemented across all languages, all TV channels. In India, for example, right now in English, all the channels actually have English same language subtitling.
Well, good.
Yeah, but the strange thing is that this was an industry decision to make the accents accessible to the viewer. But the same thing is not being done in Indian languages, and we're working closely with the government to see whether that can be done also.
Okay. And do you have any plans for the future of other things, or of more of Planet Read?
We do. We have used this learning from our subtitles project to actually see if we can get all children in India to have children's literature and reading in their language. For example, today you can't find a children's book, let's say, in even some of the major languages. Forget about the 700 or so dialects and smaller languages. But even in the 22 official languages, you just can't find children's books. Now, what we said was, okay, print model is a great approach, except that it doesn't scale that easily. So we are trying to see how children's books can be converted into digital forms, where then they become animated stories, again with the narration of the story as subtitles. And then we can replace those text and narration in Indian languages. So that way, once a children's story is produced, as in we call it an Annie book for animated story or book, once it's done in one language, it can be easily translated into other languages. So that's our book box project, which has been doing that, and we have gotten, for example, I mean, easily over 150 million views, for example, on YouTube, just of this kind of children's content.
That's great. So that was an amazing overview about your work. And thanks a lot for giving us an insight in the situation of India, in the educational COVID-19 situation, and a big congratulations to your great work with Planet Read and Book Box and maybe other projects too. So have a good time, keep safe and healthy, and big success with your work. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye to
Thank
India.
you. Thank you.